everyone. Welcome back to the Reignited Podcast. I'm your host, Jen, and today we're welcoming another very special guest. Her name is Sakira Baez. She is a Kingdom Life coach, mentor, and podcaster. And today she's going to share her testimony and talk about all of the amazing things she's doing today. Well, welcome, Sakira. We're so excited to have you on the podcast. I'm excited to talk about your testimony and everything that you're currently doing today. So I'm going to give the floor to you and let you tell our audience and all the ladies that are watching and tuning in today a little bit about you, who you are, and your story.
Okay, well, awesome. So I'm super excited to be here. My name is Sakira Baez, and I am a disruptor. And so I had to come in representing right from the get-go. I got my disruptor t-shirt,
Yes,
and that's
love
who
it.
yeah, so all the merch, you know what I mean? The merch.
Yeah.
So my business is Disrupt the Warfare. And interestingly enough, my name, Sakira, actually means love and war. So I was like, God had me appropriately named from the very get-go. And so there was a lot of disruption around my birth and even around my childhood and around my, my whole life.
Yeah.
I've been disrupting something in one capacity or another. And so I was actually born in Germany, and my dad is a retired lieutenant colonel. So I've been all over the United States through the military and of course across seas. But I came to the United States when I was quite young, and my parents were divorced by the time I was 2. Because my mom thought she married some really cool hippie dude, and and when he went into the military, he changed into a different man. So I don't know if that resonates with anyone, but that's what happened to them, and she wasn't willing to put up with who my father became, and my dad wasn't willing to put up with my mom's free hippie ways. She liked to smoke weed and all of those things, and so anyway, my father ended up getting custody of me and remarried by the time I was 5. And my mother continued living her free, wild hippie life and had a very different lifestyle. And so balancing between the two households, my dad allowed me to go spend time with my mom, but the environment around what my mother was in was significantly different. So my dad was raising me in the church, and with the appearance of everything being perfect and well put together, and a house and stability, and security that a child needs to grow up. And then when I would go to my mom's, she would give me all the material items that I needed, but her second husband after my father was ended up abusing me and molesting me. And I remember as young as the age of 3 years old, running down the street and her just screaming at me, just run, and coming up behind me and snatching me by the arm and like lifting me up in the air as a beer bottle hit right at my feet, and crashed and got smashed into smithereens. And so like, those are some of my earliest memories were of this man when I would go to visit my mother. And so it wasn't that she allowed it to happen. However, because she was subjecting herself to those types of environments, when she would bring me into her life during those time periods, she would subject me to those types of people. And so the molesting that happened, I just sort of tucked it away, and because I didn't want to be a bad kid. And my voice had at that point in time kind of been taken because so many different things that were, traumatizing for a small child, to be taken away from, one parent and be subjected to a totally different environment, and all of the conflict that happened between my parents because they were abusive towards each other, not one more abusive than the other. So that being the formation of those early years. So I was just taught to keep my voice quiet and just sort of roll with the punches. And so that's literally what I learned to do, is just roll with the punches, and lost a lot of my identity in that, trying to be the good kid and just bring the peace. I just wanted to be peaceful. I didn't want to add any more conflict to the picture. And so that that type of thinking began to, it was a bad thing, because it was like all of a sudden I had been identified by the enemy. It was like I had a mark across my head that said, abuse me, molest me, take advantage of me. And so by the time I was 6 and 7 years old, I was being molested by a pastor's son at a church that my father attended. So it was like carried over what had happened in my mom's environment into my dad's environment. And there again, I didn't say anything. And so, trying to keep the peace and be the good kid, and that was what my abusers always used against me, is they were like, well, we'll tell people that you're a bad kid. And so, no kid wants to be the bad kid.
Right.
And so, so interestingly enough, those things stayed really pressed down. By the time I was 8 years old, I remember busting my knuckles up on a brick wall because I was so angry and so frustrated. I felt like I could never be good enough. And even correction was taken to the umpteenth power, if you will, because it was like I couldn't receive correction because I was trying so hard to do the right thing and keep the peace and make everybody like me. And so by the time like I was 11, I was writing poetry about murder. And so I was definitely having anger issues. I was cutting on myself and things like that. And by the time I was 14, my stepmom and I had gotten into a disagreement. By the way, I'm the oldest of 4 other kids. So I have 3 half siblings. So I was my mother's only child, but I was, the oldest of 4 with my father. And so at the age of 14, I attempted suicide and ended up in the hospital. And I remember basically God was like, what do you think you're doing? And the relationship I have with God is a little different than a lot of people, because we're very matter of fact. This is how it is. And I think that's because love for me as a child had been tied to seduction. If somebody told me that they loved me, they were trying to seduce me. And so God didn't come at me that way. He came at to me in a way that it didn't make me feel some kind of way, if you will.
Right.
And I think that it's really important for you to note that the sound of the Father, he will meet you where you're at in a way that you can receive. And I also want to make note that if someone has come from an abusive situation and you haven't made that connection with Jesus in a way that you can receive him as a father, then it might be that you have to meet him not as, Father God. Maybe your father was, some kind of weirdo, and felt some kind of way. And so those terms like father and things like that, they make you feel some kind of way. So if you tell God, I want to meet you in a more intimate way, I want to develop a relationship with you in a more intimate way, but I need to meet you as the Lion of Judah. I need to meet you because God's willing to meet you, however you're willing to receive him. And so, and develop that relationship. And some people get so caught up in it being a very religious mindset of how you have to come in contact with God. But I want to take that type of mindset and just make it null and void, that you don't have to be all religious about it. Like, you don't have to meet Jesus the way everybody else meets Jesus. Sometimes you have to meet him as the Lion of Judah, because the Lion of Judah is a lot less intimidating because of abuse and trauma than other situations and circumstances. And so, and I think that's C.S. Lewis did it really well with when he wrote the book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I really feel like that was a way of introducing Jesus in a whole different way than what people had traditionally thought of. And I think that the Lord led him to do that because of people's traumas and things like that. So when God the Father met with me in that hospital room, he was like, what do you think you're doing? And I was like, well, I'm just done. Like, to be honest, I'm really done. I've done my best, and it's never good enough. And so I just don't really want to live anymore. And they say that heaven is like the ultimate, like that's the end. And I definitely believe in Jesus, and I love Jesus. And I did. Like I operated in my gifts from the time I was very small. When I was 8 years old, I was prophesying and bringing words of correction and things like that to my parents. And they're like, really? And At the age of 10, I said that there was going to be an end to the Cold War and Christians were going to be allowed to go into Russia. And at that point in time, that was quote unquote crazy talk. So I definitely believed in Jesus and had a very intimate relationship of and love of God. And so when he was like, "Well, check this out. Like I've given you a superpower." And this is what he told me. He's like, "I've given you a superpower." And I was like, "What do you mean a superpower?" He's like, "I've decided that I'm going to make you invincible." And I was like, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And he's like, "No matter what you do, you can't die until I decide that it's time for you to go." And I was like,
Wow.
"How is that fair?" I thought we were supposed to die to meet Jesus.
Right?
Right? And I'm like, so no matter what I do or what kind of situations I put myself in, I can't die. And he was like, that's pretty much what I'm telling you. He's
Wow.
like, you're either gonna live the way that I've directed you to live, or you're gonna live, your own way and be subject to your own choices. How you live is not up to me. He said, that's up to you. But when you die, he was like, that part is completely up to me. And he was like, and I'm telling you, I'm not going to let you die until you fulfill your purpose on this earth. And I'm like,
Wow.
really? I'm not sure that you mean what you say. So when I surrendered to that purpose, it was amazing because, like, I remember going to my parents at the age of 15 and saying, the God I know is not the God you serve. And I'm like, hey, what you're currently serving is a God of religion. And I said, and I believe God is God of relationship. And they told me, they were like, you know what? If you find a church that you feel like is relevant to what you're saying, we're willing to go there. Because, they were desperate as parents to get me to
Right.
the foot of the cross, right? And
Yeah.
so I found a church that where dancing was acceptable, and that was a big part of me. It's like I really wanted to dance. I really wanted to move in church, and we weren't allowed to do that in our environment that I was being raised in, and to really sit at the feet of the Father, and then being I was a seer and a dreamer and had visions and things like that. So being in a nurturing environment where that wasn't considered crazy, but considered normal, you
Right.
know? And
Right.
so really embracing that part and finding that people to come alongside me and help nurture those things, those giftings inside of me. And so I was anointed by the age of 17 by my church, and as the youngest prophet that they had ever anointed. And I remember
Wow.
flowing in the spirit and just for like hours, just laying hands on people and prophesying, casting demons out. And I didn't have any official training. I didn't know what, you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
was just the Holy Spirit in me giving me the boldness that I needed. And that became like one of the defining moments of my life, of that infilling of that boldness of just to step in and serve as needed, and as I was released to do so. Like nobody stopped me. Nobody said, "Oh wait, you're too young. You shouldn't be
Right.
saying those things. We need to cap this off and stop it." It was amazing. And so and we saw many miracles that day. And wanting to cultivate that within myself, I decided to go to Bible school right out of high school, and thinking that that was an incredible opportunity and all of the things. Of course, I had been studying deliverance at that point in time, and when you start to do sort of stuff like that, and you decide you're going to disrupt things on the enemy's territory, he's fine as long as you leave him alone. But when you start casting demons out and trying to delve in and learn how to disrupt the warfare around all kinds of different situations and people and circumstances and things like that, he's like, whoa, whoa, wait a minute, like you're trespassing. Like I've
Yeah.
had these territories for years. He's like, and who do you think you are to come in my territory? And it's like, well, if not me, then who?
Right.
Is what it comes down to. If
Exactly.
not me, then who? And so there was a head satanic priestess who was sent to the school, and I recognized her for who she was. And I saw the
Wow.
spirits manifest. I got confirmation after confirmation. And what I didn't know at the time is that she also had something called dissociative disorder. So I got a hands-on experience of someone who not only had dissociative disorder, but also someone who was operating under the influence of demonic powers and entities, and not just that, but also witchcraft, you know,
Mm.
and people astral projecting. And so it was like all of a sudden my world turned upside down and into a movie. And I brought it to the attention of the administration of the school, and the and I was shut down. I was told I was crazy, that I was making things up,
Wow.
that 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 me even talking, like I needed to stop talking about these things and all. And I'm like, this is my life right now, and you're telling me I can't talk about it. And I'm like, if I can't talk about it here safely, then where am I supposed to talk about it? So the administration ended up asking me to leave the school. The president actually called me and she was like, no, I need you to come back. And by then my pride was so hurt that I was like, no, you guys don't deserve me. And I don't want to be somewhere where people think that I'm crazy, is what it came down to. I was just wounded, from the
Yeah.
whole experience. That church hurt, came in. And I took that girl under my wing and never even stopped to ask God, is this my portion? Is this something that you have for me? And that was where I messed up. I let my pride get in the way, because I was like, God, surely if you showed this to me and you allowed me to see these things, then surely I'm supposed to be doing something about it. But I never asked him what I was supposed to be doing about it. I just took it upon myself to figure it out. So
Yeah.
I invited her to come live with me. I housed her, I fed her, I took care of her. Meanwhile, things didn't never get better. And I kept taking her to various churches and trying to get her the help that she needed. And again, was met with that same, like, we don't know what you're talking about. We don't know how to help you. And so there was just a lack of understanding, and really, to be honest, like hindsight, I look at it now and I go, maybe it's not just that they weren't willing to walk into it, but maybe they knew that that wasn't their portion to walk in at that time. And so me trying to force something on them that they did not feel called to was, it was them
Yeah.
creating healthy boundaries, not just around themselves, but around the church, going, hey, we don't know how to deal with that. And rather than saying that, they were coming off aggressively and saying that I was an issue, that I wasn't welcome, and
Yeah.
and that she wasn't welcome, you know. Um, and so just looking at in all these different spaces and places for answers, and keep running against brick walls. Well, it got to the point where I was physically manifesting spiritual fights. So I would show up at work and I would have choke marks on my neck. I would show up places and I would have
Wow.
scratches down my arms and things like that. And I didn't know that I had authority at that time to keep those things from happening. And I
Yeah.
didn't have
Wow.
accountability. I didn't have any intercessors. It was just me and Jesus. That was it. So it was like they were cut off at the point where they were not allowed to take my life. There again, there's that thing, you can't
Yeah.
take her life, but you can cause her harm based on her choice to continue in trying to make this work in this, what I thought was holy, but was really truly unholy, because I wasn't pursuing the relationship with the Father. I was pursuing the authority and the power at that point in time, and that was all an act of pride. And so all of that, I ended up having to sever that relationship and just move out and move away and just basically wash my hands of the situation, and went headlong into drug addiction and drinking, because it was like,
Wow.
who is this God that I serve?
Yeah.
That I thought I had a handle on things, and I clearly didn't. And clearly the enemy won that battle, and why? Why did that happen? And without having any type of accountability or anybody who could answer those questions, um, or anyone educated in that area that was in my community, or that people could direct me to, at least, go, hey, I don't know what you're talking about, but I've heard this person talk about those things. I just continued in drug addiction. And it was like, well, I tried to find out I figured out how good I could be, but let's see how bad I can be because bad seems to be the new good, you know? And so I spent 10 years in drug addiction and doing what in drug addiction, what I did in the spirit realm. So I was like beating people up, you know, and
Yeah.
making them, I was like the criminal underworld's form of justice without being police officers and, you know, and judges and stuff like that. If somebody stole something from you and you were my friend and you told me, hey, somebody stole this and such, I would go beat them up and take from them whatever they took from you. And then I would take interest, you know, to pay myself, you know,
Yeah.
and so I lived in that criminal underground world as a drug regulator for, you know, 10 years. And it wasn't something that happened overnight. I ended up owning an escort business, being one of the business owners for an escort business. And just like this very twisted way of thinking, well, if that's what you want to do with your body and with your choices, then I will help you, you know, find the right resources and the right people. And it's interesting how all of those things came into play. And then when I was looking at 25 years in prison, and I was truly done. And I remember the last time that I was arrested, and I had lots of drugs on me, all stuck in my bra, my socks, and things like that. And I had everything from meth to heroin to oxycodones, you know, anything you could think of or imagine. I had it on my person, and they didn't. When they arrested me, they didn't find any of it. And so I was like,
Wow.
okay, Jesus, I see you. I see you in all of this. And I was like, okay, I'm done. Like I had just been raped 2 weeks before I had been arrested by what I believe was a serial rapist. And that's a whole nother testimony and
Wow.
story for another time. But I strongly believe that that person was a serial rapist. I fought tooth and nail to get away from him and just could not. and and so I was like, and even a week before that arrest, I had somebody shoot at me at point blank range and put the gun right to my head, and the bullet did like it went and it hit the wall behind me. So it went through
Wow.
my head, but didn't go through my head because there again, let me tell you, that's the Lord saying, not this time. Like it's not my time for you to die. And I remember the look on the guy's face. He's like I know I just pulled the trigger. And I know that I had
Wow.
every intention of blowing your brains out. And it didn't happen. So go, just go, you know.
Wow.
And and so when I ended up getting arrested that time, I was just like, okay, Jesus, like we're like I'm really done. And I went to the bathroom and I took all the drugs and I flushed them down the toilet. And and the Lord said, he's like, okay, he was like, I see you. I'm gonna work on your behalf. And then I went outside to smoke a cigarette. When I went outside, I asked them because I had been telling them I was different people. I had been not telling them who I really was. And so I was like, hey, can I go smoke a cigarette? Because I was processing with the Father what this looked like, with what my full surrender looked like. And I went outside and smoked a cigarette. They didn't put any handcuffs on me. They shut the door. They didn't have a guard out there. And under any other circumstances, like had I not been talking to Jesus at that moment, I would have ran. I
Yeah.
straight up would have ran.
Wow.
But because of the situation and the circumstances, and because I had seen God's hand directly intervene so much in the last few weeks, and actually it was over the process of a year, because even a year before that moment, I had 5 men who jumped me and dragged me out to a desert to bury me because they thought I was dead. That's
Oh my
another
goodness.
part of my testimony where God said, nope, it's not time for you to die. He helped me live through that situation too. And so I have all these situations that are adding up. I'm like, God, okay, I see you. And I'm like, I even see this situation that you have put me in right now where there's no, like I could run, and you're giving me the opportunity to run if I want to. But I'm telling you, like, I see this as a work of the devil, and I'm not going to do it. I'm like, I'm in it to win it, and I'm in it to win it with Jesus. And so I'm surrendering. So I'm going to smoke this cigarette. I'm going to go back in there and I'm going to tell him who I am. And I could see like God just being woo, 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 woo. we have finally turned it around.
Yep.
So, um, so I did. I went in and I had kept them at bay as to who I was for about 3 hours. I was like, look, I'm Sakira Baez. I gave him all my information. And I remember it was an older gentleman and he like looks up my information and he just looks at me and his shoulders sank and his head went down and he's like, I was going to let you go.
Oh my God.
And I was like, yeah.
Wow.
Well. He was like, you have like 10 felony charges. All this crazy.
Oh,
like,
man.
He's like, you've been on the run for 18 months. And I'm like, yeah,
Wow.
I know all of it. He's like, I have to take you in. I'm like, I know, and it's okay. But the Lord told me, he said, when I surrendered on that, when I was outside that smoking that cigarette, he was like, because you've honored me in this decision, he was like, I'll make sure you don't do 1 day in prison. And for the sake of time, I will buckle down and give this to you, because I went before that judge and the judge was ready to throw the book at me. Like literally, I was looking at 25 years in prison. And when I was in jail, don't get me wrong, like it was a Holy Ghost experience, but like I was still beating people up on the side because I need money on my commissary books. So I was like leading devotions and then still beating somebody up the next morning. Leading devotions and then going and smacking somebody in the face. Leading devotion, even leading praise and worship. Like I would lead praise and worship. And I remember at one point in time when I was in jail, there was a girl who was having a miscarriage and she started bleeding and all the craziness. And so I told the whole pod, I was like, no, y'all are going to come down here. I don't care if it's Satanist. I don't care who you could believe in Buddha. You're going to pray and you're going to pray to Jesus today. And nobody wanted to mess with me because they knew I'd beat them up if they didn't come down there and pray. And so what was awesome though is that she ended up not having a miscarriage and the baby was fine. So
wow,
it was like
that's amazing.
Yeah, right. The power of prayer and someone, even if it's not, that whole dynamic of it was my whole entire life was about progress, not perfection. And so shattering that stronghold of we have to be perfect in order for God to use us. No, sometimes you just have to show up. And that was what, with me and Jesus, that's what it was a matter of, is it was a matter of me just showing up and being willing to be obedient in that moment. And so when I stood up before that judge, he was like, you're going to confess guilt to all of these things that they're charging with, because you know that you've done way more than what they're charging you with. And anyone who's been in the judicial system is like, that doesn't even make sense. Like you always plead bargain, And I got before that judge and I plead guilty to everything that they were charging me with. And as he was getting ready to sentence me to those 25 years, he flipped through the paperwork one last time and something caught his eye. And he even said, I went through these papers 3 to 4 hours last night looking for a reason to give you mercy. And he was like, and I didn't find anything. And as he flipped through that paperwork, he found a discrepancy in my paperwork that didn't allow him to send me to prison. And instead, he was like, okay, well, I'm going to give you a suspended sentence of 25 years. And he was like, and I'm pretty sure I'll see you again. He was like, because you're a menace to society and I don't foresee you ever changing. So because all my charges were different and they were all first and second degree felonies. So he was like, I just don't foresee you changing. He was like, I see this as a continued cycle. And I prophesied in that moment. And I said, you'll never see me again. I said, my word is my bond. And I said, on the streets, that's good as gold. If I say it, then that's how it's going to be. And I said, and you'll never see me again. And sure enough, I did end up going to jail because I had gone to jail under a fake identity 18 months later. But because I had earned such favor with my probation officer actually wrote a letter to the judge and said, hey, could you not say anything to anybody and wrap these charges with her other charges so it doesn't show up as a new case, or however that works. And the judge agreed. And I happened to be 3 months pregnant with my now 15-year-old daughter and had been doing well for about 18 months. And so jumping through all the hoops, doing all the things, and reminding myself that it was just for a season, that I had to do whatever the system was asking me to do. But all of that wrapped up into who I am today, and what I do today is I go in with disruptive warfare after, I've been clean since 2007 was the last time I ever did drugs. And I've had 5 beautiful kids since then. I own my own house. And I own a couple of different businesses. And so I'm grateful to actually have coached Miss Jen over here for a season, and have been just been so blessed to help people birth podcasts, birth businesses, birth ministries, and just come alongside them and help ignite them in a fresh and new way. Because I've been down to the bottom. I know what rock bottom looks like literally, in every facet. And I remember asking Jesus at one point in time, why did you allow me to see what I saw when I went to that Bible school? And he was like, I said, why did I have to go down that road? And he was like, I never asked you to get involved. He's like, I asked you to pray. And if you would have asked me at that moment, I would have asked you to intercede and pray people into position, because I allowed you to see all the faults of those quote unquote of those churches and those people, not so you could judge them, but you could intercede and pray people into position who would have a compassion for this kind of ministry, because they truly did not understand. And he was like, it was your pride that got in the way, because you thought it was all about you. And that they were trying to hurt you. And they were just trying, I was allowing you to see the vulnerable side of those churches. And so now I get to see vulnerable sides of leaders, because I was willing to actually ask the Father where I went wrong in all of that, and where I made my mistakes, and then admit, repent, renounce, and break agreement with those things that I had done in the past. Not because God was looking to shame me or condemn me, but he wanted me to move forward and level up. And sometimes until we were willing to revisit those things and say, hey, where were you in all this? Because that looked pretty crazy. And that didn't really sit right with me. And I'm a little upset with you about it, to be quite honest. But it's that honesty. And if you look at King David, David was a man after God's own heart, because he was honest with God. Mm-hmm. He would tell him, I don't like these people. Like, maybe you could kill them or something. Yeah. And then God would radically shift his heart. And so I realized that that's what I'm here. That's what the purpose that I serve on this earth is, to disrupt the warfare that people are going through intercession, through prayer, through identifying how the enemy is maneuvering. And God, when I was in my addiction, I identified myself as Lucifer. And it was because everyone blamed me for everything. And so when God allowed me to see that in myself in that season and time, that oftentimes we blame things on the devil because we don't want to accept responsibility for our own choices. And so disrupting the warfare around those choices, around your mind traffic, and helping people to level up in that and move forward. I also have a community group called Motherhood Mess Unfiltered, where we deep dive in our own podcast, which you can find on Podbean, and delve into some of the messiness of motherhood. And I do that with a good friend of mine, Janine Armstrong, and Corey Messner, and we each bring our own spiritual gifts to the table, and insight into the different topics every single month, and provide that community as a safety net, for women to not just get prayer, but to also gain understanding in what can be a really messy season. Yes. We can invite Jesus into it. And when we look at our children and even our husbands as our first ministry, everything falls into place the way that it should. And when we can learn to let them find their own faith and not take everything they do so personally.
Right. Trust me. It's a little hard sometimes, but
oh my goodness. Like, for real.
I
have to tell these kids, I'm like, you remember, like, mama used to throw hands, okay?
Oh man.
Like, mama's not afraid.
So act right, act right.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'll put myself in timeout. I'll be like, look, like, you bringing the gangster straight out of me. So I need you to go to your room so that I
I
can
love
find
that. You're
Jesus.
bringing the gangster straight out of me. I love that. Well, your testimony is just so incredible, Sakira. And yes, side note, I wanted to let you kind of keep flowing because you were flowing
Yes.
and you were sharing some great stuff and sharing your testimony.
Yes.
So I didn't want to interrupt. But I just want to touch back on that. So yes, Sakira was my coach and my mentor when I was going through ministry school at the King's Company, and she was incredible. And so I'm so honored to have you on the podcast today. And I'm also part of the Motherhood Mess Unfiltered community, and it's a great community. I've invited some of our ladies from Live Reignited and the Women Reignited community as well in mentorship there. Great podcast. I will make sure I will leave all of the links to connect with all of the things that Sakira has going on, all of her businesses and her endeavors in the description box below if you're watching on YouTube, or in the show notes if you're watching or if you're tuning in on one of the podcast platforms. But yes, like, I think you're amazing. I just love your mentality and what God has instilled in you and what you're doing. It's amazing. I love the disrupt the warfare. And I just want to again just talk about what an amazing coach that you are, because I have personal experience. I worked one-on-one with you for, my goodness, what was it, 6 months? Almost 6 months. So and we had regular calls weekly. And so, even leaders need coaching, even leaders need mentorship, and need to stay accountable. And sometimes, even though we're doing big things, like I get questions all the time, like, how do you do this, and this? Well, God, I mean, I stay in that relationship, and every day is hard. We're humans. We're not perfect. Sakira and I were just talking about giving up habits, and my coffee habit is something that I'm working on, and I won't give up yet. And when I do, I'm going to be kicking and screaming if God ever tells me I need to give it up. So, but to my point, it's just, we still, even as leaders, even if you're in leadership or you're looking to get into ministry, or you're looking to get into any type of leadership, or even starting a podcast. I have a lot of ladies that ask questions about starting a podcast. But you also have to make sure that you're positioning yourself, because depending on what you're talking about, if you're in ministry, when you're talking about the wonderful things God is doing, you're going to encounter warfare. It's just going to happen. And you have to be in that place of prayer, and you have to be in that relationship with the Lord, and you have to surround yourself with intercessors and people that have your back and that are going to pray for you. And that's something that I lacked for a long time, for years, until recently, once I started the podcast. And and it's funny because God placed all of these amazing people and women in my path. And we find that, right? Same thing with your testimony, Sakira, just placing certain people in your path, and guiding you to get you exactly where you needed to be. So that's amazing. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's something we as women often do, is that we tend to think that we're not worth the investment, or that our money would be better spent elsewhere. And so
Yes.
I can honestly say that when I decided to go to the King's Company and invest in myself, I remember telling my husband, this is funny. So my husband, he's not on the same spiritual understanding level that I am, or he has a different way of talking to God and hearing from God and things like that. And so he's just not there in certain ways. So I remember when I decided to make the investment in ministry school, my father had told me that there was something I had left undone. And I knew immediately it was that going to Bible school or ministry school. And and so when I decided to jump in, and I paid it in full on a credit card that I had, and I went and got my husband. I was like, hey, I need to take you out tonight. And he was like, oh, really? I was like, yeah, we're going to go out on a date. And I took him he likes to play pool. So we went to go play pool, and I bought him a shot and a beer. And I was like, yeah, go ahead.
Buttering him up, right?
That's exactly what it was. And I was like, hey, I need to tell you something. And I told him, and I was like, and he looked, I remember his face just kind of dropped, and I was like, you're never going to see a bill for this. I said, number one. And number two, I said, this is going to catapult us into the next level that God has for us and totally change our lives. And I can honestly say he never saw the bill for it at all. And it did. It catapulted us into what we're doing now, and it not only opened the doors for opportunity for ministry and for business, but I've had the opportunity to speak on international radio shows, television shows, and share my testimony. And so had I not been through the ministry school and saw that I was God's wealth. Like, I remember asking God, what do you consider wealth? Because most people consider money, gems, gold, those things wealth. And I remember him telling me the wealth of heaven is people. And if people would recognize their own value, that no one can do what they're called to do in this earth. He was like, then they would, and then they would work together. He was like, then at that moment, when they work together, they realize their value and stand against the enemy, advance the kingdom of God. Then and only then are they a perfect reflection of me.
That's amazing. But it's true. It's true. Yes. And even women, like you mentioned before too, a lot of times we don't think we're worth an investment, or we don't think that we're worth pursuing certain things. Like, if we have a passion about something, this is something I preach all the time on the podcast and our mentorship group. When you feel a fire inside, you're super passionate about something, go with that, because it's usually God telling you this is the direction that he wants you to go. This is what you're called to do. And even if it's scary, if you're like, oh, I don't know, I would love to do that, but man, I don't know if I could do that. You can. You just have to take the right steps. And you have to believe in your ability to do that. And so, again, we're really big on empowering women to walk in their calling, walk in their purpose, and just take that next step, even if it's a scary step, if it's a little scary, because I did it. I did it over the past few years. I would have never, if you would have told me 5 years ago that I was going to go into ministry and have a podcast and be helping women and have a mentorship, I'd have been like, you're nuts. Like, that is great, but that would never be me. I would never do anything like that. And God was pleasantly surprised me. He's like, nope, this is what you're going to do. This is what you're going to have. And it's all come into fruition. And again, it falls into that being obedient. It falls into that obedience, because that's how you're going to see the fruit of that, by walking in obedience. But yeah,
I think a pivotal point too is realizing that the enemy wants you to think that you're a problem. You're your husband's problem. You're your kid's problem. You're a problem.
Yep.
But the truth of the matter is God created you to be a solution. And it's up to you to realize that you are the solution for your husband, because you're his mate. And then you are the solution for your children, because who better to pray and intercede for them and see them as they're called to be, not just as they act out, but identify them by their kingdom assignment and go, you know what, I see this stubbornness in you, and I call it null and void. However, I embrace your strong-willedness, and it will be used by the Lord for you to stand strong in the face of adversity,
Right.
And so we are the solution. We are the solution to our family's problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I'm going to start saying that now. Be like, hey, honey, when I get on your nerves, I'm the solution to your problem. You know that? I'm just reminding you, just a little reminder. Awesome. Well, this was an amazing conversation. It was so great to be able to hear your testimony, Sakira. And again, I'm just so blessed and honored to be able to allow you to share it on our platform here on the podcast. But I'm going to wrap it up here today. Again, we'll share all of the ways you can connect with Sakira in the description box below or in the show notes. So make sure you go connect with Sakira. She has some awesome stuff going on. And if you need coaching services or anything to that effect, again, we'll leave her information so you can connect with her directly and she can share more about that. So, but all right, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time. Bye. I love it. Yes.